included on here. Okay, most of the time what I have found is that in order for me to be able to give you guys the actual nitty gritty on this stuff, we have to spend a decent amount of time hitting the historical information, the psychological, the philosophical, all that kind of stuff in order for this other kind of action stuff to even make sense. And then a lot of times I still can't give total like action advice, like this is what you should wear, this is how you should wear it, until we get into a Q&A, and then you actually ask me questions where I can get some extra and additional context from you. So what we're going to do to be able to kind of start this off is we're going to dive into some really big picture stuff and then go from there. So let's do this. I'm going to share my screen so you guys can watch this. Okay, trust. Okay, we're going to do it a different way. Don't you love that there's always technological issues as soon as we get started, right? Mm-hmm. Always. Okay, we're going to do it via AirPlay instead. Wow. Okay, while we're waiting for this to happen, okay, here's the deal, guys. To understand this the right way, we need to understand culture in general and how this works related to the way that culture is passed down and the way that culture is spread. Prior to the 20th century, culture used to move in very big, long swaths. You would see changes. You'd look at clothing or music or art or architecture or ideas on religion or ideas on philosophy or other things. And obviously, the 18th century is different than the 17th century, which is different than the 16th century. But it took a long time to create these changes. And most of the time, what would happen is that culture would translate very linearly, so that we would have basically this idea of time, and then we would have this idea of progress. And you would have culture that would kind of move like this. And it wasn't like perfectly linear. Maybe it would go like this, but for the most part, we could follow a line with it. Okay. Now, when you get into big kind of revolutions and big changes, when you look at the French Revolution and the rejection of what the French aristocracy was, you look at the fall of Rome and these big cultural changes, and that's when you get major cultural shifts. That's when you get big changes in attitudes about art or architecture, literature, clothing, anything else that has to do with culture. But again, the way that culture was passed down for the most part had to do with hierarchy. It was passed down grandfather to father and father to son. And we would always look to our ancestors in order to build upon, not just stagnate, but to build upon what it was. And so culture was done in this hierarchy way. Now, an interesting that happened in the 20th century, and I don't know why this happened. I don't know if this has to do with the Industrial Revolution. I don't know if this has to do with all the fallout and the body count and everything else from both great wars. I don't know what it was, but we went from culture being something that was dictated from the top down, and not when we went from being a people that were ancestor oriented, or even on a limited scale being parent oriented, to being very peer oriented. And rather than looking to the people that came before us to help us determine what our culture was, we looked to our peers to determine what that was. And this is why as soon as we get into the 20th century, you see an entire different approach to culture, where it seemed like every single decade, it would be, you'd have this one kind of linear culture that would establish this way, and then you would get the reverse of that. So you have the 50s, and then the 60s would be a counterculture to that. And then you would have a 70s that would be kind of a recursion, and then the 80s would go this way. And so cultures would not only stack on top of each other, but very often within a short period of time, just a single decade, you would get a complete rejection of what the culture was in the past. One of the most interesting ways that I've heard this has to do with the idea of sitcoms, where if you watch a sitcom in a given decade, it's only acceptable, and the humor within that sitcom is only acceptable within that time period. The ideas that were promoted in Cheers in the 80s would have been too offensive to be funny in the 70s or the 60s, and they were antiquated and outdated in the 90s and the 2000s. Same thing when you get to Friends in the 90s, or you get to The Office in the 2000s. And this is why now 15 years later, you have people talking about how problematic something as simple as The Office is, because we as a culture are so far removed from that, just like that show wouldn't have done well in the 90s because that culture was so far removed from that period. So because we went from trying to take the culture of our peers, take the culture of our parents and our ancestors and build upon it or emulate it or do something else with it, to basically every young generation, every group of people in their teens or in their 20s would instead follow kind of the baby boomer ethos, even though they weren't the first ones to do it, but they were the ones to first come up with the idea of never trust anybody over 30. This became the main cultural driver. It was our peers. And what that meant is there is no linear progress. There is no building upon previous cultures. Every single generation starts with its own idea. And then what's made this even more interesting is within the last 10 years, with the advent of social media, not only do we see an acceleration of that timeline, but we also see an acceleration of the bifurcation of it, because I'm not geographically limited to the people that may or may not think like me in my neighborhood or at my school or at my church or something else. We have access to each other. And so you guys have access to me and my ideas, even though I may not live next to you. I have access to you and your ideas. And so we can create these micro cultures that are all very limited in our scope and in our presentation and in our ideas and ideals, just based on what we are. And so we have gone from this very large monoculture, and a large monoculture that was built off of what our parents had established and are continuing that tradition and passing it down to our kids, into a very balkanized, very tribal set of multiple different cultures, and very few of those cultures ever actually carry on. This is why the rebellion of the 80s and the 90s, that old idea of the punk ethos, this is why punk is dead. This is why rock and roll is no longer rebellious. This is why extreme sports are accepted in the Olympics and they're no longer considered rebellious, because everything that was at one point a rejection no longer has that thing to reject against. And this is why the things that people clutch their pearls at now are the things that were the rebellion of a previous generation, and will likely maybe be the rebellion of an upcoming generation. So there's no more permanence in our culture. So then this is where the age factor comes in. How do you fit into this when your culture that you grew up with, that was the mainstream or dominant, or at least even with your own particular tribe, a very effective and a very lively and a very invigorating culture, when it dies and it loses all of its relevance because it's been replaced by a younger culture? And what do you do for you younger guys that are in this position where you recognize that, holy crap, I'm in my prime when it comes to culture building, and I only have a limited amount of time in which I'm at the front of the line and I'm at my most impactful, and I'm slowly going to lose relevance as things go. So one of the easiest ways to look at all of this, as far as the timeline and everything is concerned, and this is something that we see a lot with technology, is the innovation scale. So it looks like this, where we go, it's kind of the bell curve. We can even do the bell curve meme with this. So over here, you have your innovators, all right? These are the people that maybe it's the first person to adopt a particular social media platform, or the first person to adopt a new technology, or in our case, when it comes to clothing, these are the people who are on the cutting edge of trends, and the ones who are really dressing in a way that pisses off other tribes or pisses off other generations, but it's very cutting edge and it's changing a lot of things. Then you get your early adopters that kind of come in. They're not taking the big risk because the ground has already been cleared a little bit. Then you get to where these ideas become mainstream. Then we move on to our late adopters. And then lastly, we get to our laggards or our holdouts. And again, we see this in a lot of things, but clothing is a really good example of this. So this is where we have to start to look at where we fit within different age groups and how this can be applicable in that way. Because how we are from an age perspective is exactly what's going to determine where on this graph we should fall. So for the most part, when we're in our younger age, when we're in our teens and in our 20s, we have the cultural engine and the cultural drive to be more over in the early adopter or the innovator phase. Okay, so this will say like teens and 20s. When we get into our 30s to our 50s, we still want to be here, maybe not right on the cutting edge, but we want to be somewhere that's more in here. So we'll say 30s to 50s. And then contrary to popular belief, even when you're past your 50s, you don't want to be over here in the laggard phase. You still want to be somewhere from about here to only here. So we'll say 60s plus. And what this means is that we still want to hold on to some level of cultural relevance. And one of the distinctions that I want to make that matters in this is the difference between trendiness or innovation and relevance, because relevance still matters. There's no such thing as timeless style, right? Something that would have been timeless 200 years ago is not applicable today. We're not wearing frock coats or spats or top hats. We're not carrying canes. And it doesn't matter how dignified or how high status or anything that was. We're not doing that anymore because it's part of a dead culture. And the symbolism that was infused in those particular pieces of clothing no longer holds any relevance for us. Same thing with togas, same thing with samurai armor, same thing with any other article of clothing you can come up with from a previous generation. But the hard thing is the closer we are to that time period, especially for us when we're older, the more we want to hold on to what that was, and the more difficult it becomes to be able to let that go, especially because our culture loses its relevancy. The things that we stood up for, the things that we believed in start to lose their relevancy. So that's the first thing that we need to look at, is just where our age is and how we should be factoring trendiness versus relevancy versus like complete obsolescence. But there's another factor that we have to play into here that makes things more interesting. And this is status. Okay. Now, sadly, we are in a culture where status matters more than anything else. We're not an honor culture. We're not a dignity culture. We're a status culture. And status signals matter almost more than anything else when it comes to being able to communicate relevancy, when it comes to being able to grease palms and make business happen, when it comes to being able to attract women, when it comes to almost anything else. Trust me that I am frustrated that that's the culture that we're in. I wish that we were judged by much more meaningful and important and moral and dignified things, but we're in a status culture. And so it behooves us to some extent play that status game, especially if we can use that status as a way to then reinfuse some of those more moral attributes and virtues that we would like to see more culture hold on to. So when you are higher status, so let's say our status is here. When you are higher status, you have the ability to move further in this direction toward innovator or early adopter. You have more social capital that will allow you to be able to take more social risks. Whereas when your status is lower, then you're forced to be over here on this end. But again, this whole area is a no-go zone. We don't want to be over here in this like complete obsolescence, because this just shows that we lack any sort of social fluidity. We don't understand the fact that culture changes, that things change, and we're dead. The best way that I can think to put this, especially when you think of the Thomas Jefferson quote in matters of principle, stand firm like a rock, but in matters of fashion, flow with the current, is you think about a big river. You think about something like the Nile or the Amazon or the Mississippi, and the river doesn't flow in a uniform way. There are parts where the current is fast and it moves a lot, which is what's happening over here with the innovation and the early adoption. There are parts where it flows relatively steady, but it's still moving. And then there are parts where it's totally dead. And what happens to dead, stagnant water? It goes bad. You get leeches. You get all the problems that come with that dead, stagnant water, whereas the healthy water is something that's always moving to some extent. So the younger we are, the faster those currents are that we can be in. The higher status we have, the faster those currents are that we can be in. Whereas the older we are and or the lower status we have, then the more we're going to be better off in those good, steady, consistent currents. Okay. Give me a thumbs up if that whole general concept makes sense to you guys. Awesome. Okay. So Tanner, what the crap does this mean, right? How does this actually apply to my clothing? And how do I start to look at this in a way that's actually going to be applicable? Well, let's talk about that. Okay. So we've all seen the baby boomer dad uniform of the baggy pants, the aloha shirt. In this case, Chin. It's Sam Axe in, what's his name? Wow. Anyway, doesn't matter. In this case, he's actually wearing loafers or dress shoes as opposed to like the dad white New Balance sneakers. But we've all seen this uniform. And it's this idea of I have reached a certain age in my life where I no longer have to be part of the current. I can exit the river and I can just aesthetically die in this dead part of the water, because what matters most is that I'm comfortable. Or we can see this guy over here that's more in like mid age. He's probably in his late 30s, early 40s, somewhere in there. You guys probably saw this post on my social media earlier this week. And this is the guy that's experiencing the aesthetic inertia of holding on to what was high status or what was trendy when he was at his prime, when he was young, but it no longer is, because that particular culture is dead and gone. We've moved past that particular shoreline, and he hasn't adapted or adopted and moved on to something else. And so the two pitfalls that we come up against here are, one, completely giving up and thinking that it doesn't matter, and I'm just going to wear what's comfortable, either from a physical standpoint or the comfort of low or dead expectations. So we've got that. Or we've got two, trying to hold on to whatever was relevant at the time and trying to, like, in this almost incredibly stubborn way, insist that because this was cool when I was cool, that it's still cool now. And so ironically, what this signals is even lower status. So it moves us over to the far end of this, where not only is the aesthetic dead, but our insistent that we hold on to it communicates that we are of no status within whatever the current paradigm is. And that's why we're clinging so desperately to this old status symbol. So these are the first two pitfalls that we butt up against when we're middle-aged or older. Okay. Now there's a counterbalance to this that we have to watch out for as well, which is getting too trendy or too young and adopting too much too quickly. Because what this then starts to signal is that I've sacrificed, or that I haven't actually attained, or I haven't built any status in general for myself. Because here's where this gets even trickier is, yes, we have all these little fractured cultures and these little tribes and these little symbols of status. But at the same time, we recognize in a meta context masculine status in a particular way that we don't want to sacrifice that. And so when it comes down to this, you think about the young guy, and this may be somebody in college, this may be somebody 5,000 years ago that's dealing with, mastodons and whatever else. This may be somebody that's living today, but young guys are untested. All they have is potential. Their potential is through the roof, but their actual experience is down as low as it can get. And so they have to rely on things like bravado or courage or thrill seeking or attention getting as a way to signal that they're starting to break into and starting to manifest some of that potential and turning it into actual accomplishment and turning it into actual status. Whereas once you get to your mid 30s or older, you should have accomplished something in your life and you should have earned some real status. That may be a reputation, that may be financial wealth, that may be connections in a network. It may just be a sense of confidence because you've been around the block a few times. And so you don't have to flinch at everything that may seem like it's dangerous or jump on every trend because you're desperate for people to approve of you. And so what these two men are signaling is that they don't recognize their own inherent status that they likely have, and they should be embracing just as a result of having lived long enough and not being complete like gutter trash. Okay. There's status that comes with that just from living a certain amount of time, but they rely on this idea of, this is how I signaled status when I was young. And so I have to continue to signal it this way. So it's a conflation of what works for young guys, and they're applying it to themselves as they're older. 9 times out of 10, you guys, this is what happens when you ask your wife for fashion advice. Because for women, trying to maintain that youthfulness, that trendiness, honestly, even from a biological perspective, the fertility, the youth, all of those things on both a cultural and a biological level, the younger a woman can make herself appear, the more attractive she's going to be, irrespective of her age. But for men, it's different. Women peak in their 20s, men peak somewhere between their 40s and their 60s. And so when we are at that stage of life, when we're at our peak and we're dressing like we're too young, we're throwing away real, actual, realized status, dignity, authority, mastery, respect, all the good things that we should have earned as men. And we're burning it at the altar in order to have youthfulness or trendiness or any of these other things that are in the realm of young guys. And so we want to make sure that we don't go the route of just completely giving up and thinking that this stuff doesn't matter. We don't want to hold on to a dead style from the past when we would have been at our peak, but we also don't want to too quickly or too wholeheartedly embrace any trends that are coming up from a younger generation, we want to hold on. And again, this is the difference between trendiness and relevance. And so what you'll notice with these guys in particular is that there's a lot of bright colors. There's a lot of trendiness on fits. There's a lot of reliance on formality or on unique attention-seeking pieces. And so rather than the clothing being a supplement to how they are as men, these guys are just mannequins for their clothes. That's it. Whereas what we want to be able to accomplish is being more than that. So here's some good examples of ways that when you're in your 40s and up, you can actually start to dress like you've got some dignity and some earned status. So one of the first things is keep your fits simple, not hyper skinny, not really baggy, because that is one of those waves that we're going to see come and go over and over and over again. As one group rejects the aesthetics of another group, and as they reject the entire moral structure of another group, we're going to go from baggy to skinny to baggy to skinny. We're going to go from big lapels to skinny lapels. We're going to go from hyper tight to hyper loose. This is a cycle we're going to be on for a long time. So if you're older, reject that in its entirety. Maybe when things are a little bit wider, you embrace a little bit more of a drape. And when things are a little bit skinnier or a lot skinnier, you embrace a fit that's a little bit trimmer, but you avoid the full extreme on it. So if the range is 1 to 10, you're operating at like a 3 to a 7. And most of the time you're hanging out right in that 5 territory. Keep your colors simple and keep them dark. This again adds an element of dignity. It adds an element of authority, and it adds an element of self-respect. Okay, because you don't have to rely on bright, attention-seeking colors that young guys or the tree frog or the coral snake or somebody else is having to rely on in order to get attention, in order to be able to signal relevance. You've attained enough relevance based on what your own accomplishments are. And so you can rely on the fact that things are simple in order to be able to make them work for you. This is another thing that can really start to work to your advantage on this, is when you start to embrace really classic things. And this is where things get kind of tricky, because there are certain menswear pieces that have been relevant for enough decades that they no longer fall in that big old yellow X of being completely culturally obsolete, but they've been able to exist enough in certain cultures that they kind of maintain their relevance. Jeans work regardless of the decade. T-shirts work regardless of the decade. Work shirts, which is like this guy in the middle. It's a more casual button up with more texture and more pockets and flat pockets. It looks more like you're wearing it in a blue collar environment as opposed to a dress shirt that you wear under a suit. Those have maintained a certain level of it. Steve Carell wearing the Ray-Bans. Ray-Bans have been popular in every single decade. The V-neck sweater, these kinds of things have translated across so much that you can get away with wearing them. And so for us older guys, and I'm not even, I'm 37, I'm just kind of at the beginning of this stage, but for us who have earned some level of status and some level of authority and dignity and self-respect, go back to some of those more classic pieces, but then repurpose them from a fit perspective, or what it is that you're pairing them with, or the environment in which you're wearing them in a more consistent or in a more contemporary way. Okay, more examples of this. We've got Clive Owen in this really thick cable knit shawl cardigan. This is very different than just wearing a hoodie. Right? From a comfort perspective, it accomplishes everything the same way. From a protection against the elements perspective, it accomplishes everything the same way. But it doesn't look like he gave up, because there's still some level of dignity that's infused in this. It's not hyper trendy, because this is the stuff that men were wearing 200 years ago when they were sitting around the fireplaces in their countryside mansions. And so it holds on to all of that. And again, dark colors that keep it relevant. Same thing with gentlemen over here on the right. Simple fits, simple colors, allowing the clothing to be a supplement to who you are as a man. Now, yes, this is so much easier when your grooming is dialed, when your posture is good, when you're in good shape. And so the better you take care of yourself from a grooming and from a physique standpoint, not only are you just going to look objectively better in whatever it is that you wear, but that also, again, elevates your relative status, which gives you more freedom to be able to play around in the realm of trendiness versus relevance versus adopting old styles or anything to that effect. And so stick to a good exercise program, keep consistent on hairstyles, keep consistent on grooming, make sure your posture continues to stay good, do all of those things so that you can, one, obviously they're awesome for their own sake, but then two, because it gives you more room to be able to play around with in there. Okay, let's move to the younger guys. What younger guys a lot of times experience is a mix of both problems where they have no earned status, they have no earned authority, they have no earned respect. Like we said, they're all entirely potential. But then what happens is they try to dress in a way that signals all of those things, and then not only signals something that they haven't earned, but it signals it from a time and a culture that is dead and gone. This is what the gentle dork phenomenon is, where it's usually kind of low status loser dudes who can't get girls, they can't get good jobs, they don't have a lot of self-esteem, they spend too much time on different forums and online. And what they try to do as a way to elevate their self-esteem, elevate their level of cool within the world, is they try to dress in a way that maybe their icons from the past did. But they're too young to have, exactly, Jaron, it's the fedora guys. They're too young to have earned any of that status. So even if this were 80 years ago, it would look ridiculous on them because they're flexing something that they don't have to flex. But then they're totally missing the fact that that flex is dead and gone and it doesn't matter anymore anyway. I'm hard on these guys because, as you can see the picture on the right, that's me. I went through my own gentle dork phase 10 years ago as I was learning all this stuff, and I had to learn it the hard way. But suits, fedoras, driving gloves when I'm not even driving a speed, like, these things are ridiculous. And it's a desperate attempt to hold on to dead status symbols for something that you haven't even earned. Okay. So that's the first problem that guys run into, and largely the biggest problem, because young guys, you guys can do pretty much anything as long as you're willing to take risks. And again, doing the same thing that the older guys do. Get and maintain yourself in good shape. Learn good social skills. Take risks. Take physical and social risk. If you've got the propensity for it, take financial risks. Spend some time in the gym. Get your grooming on point. Learn how to talk to girls. And as you do all these things, you have so much flexibility to be able to play with style in a number of different ways. Now, yes, you still need to be able to think about the things that I harp on all the time, as far as like, what are the tribes you belong to and how are things signaled within those tribes? And what are the signals that you want to send? What are your archetypes and what's the balance between rugged and refined and rakish in a way that works for you? Because if you're not a gym bro and you're dressing like Jesse James West up here, it doesn't matter how well you pull it off or how stylish it looks. It's going to feel inconsistent with who you are on the inside, and it's not going to work. Or if you live in a casual environment and you're dressing like Jose Zuniga over here in a turtleneck and a suit, and it's, you know, the skinny fit that's on trend and the sockless and the white sneakers, but you're in a casual environment, it doesn't matter what your status is. It doesn't matter how good you feel about yourself. It's still largely socially obtuse. So your youth does not free you up from focusing on the other things like archetypes, tribes, location, these other fundamentals that I hit on in my courses and that you guys see as I talk about it on my other social media. But you young guys are wasting a ton of potential if you don't take social risks, if you don't take aesthetic risks and use the opportunities to make these mistakes to really start to figure out who you are and how it is that you want to dress. But don't do it by going totally old school. Do it in ways that are reflective of where you currently are right now. Do it in ways that are reflective of what your tribes and what your archetype ratio is right now. So, big kind of final takeaways on this, okay? This is going to change all the time. You are never going to be able to pick a style right now, set it, and forget it. As awesome as that would be, it's not going to happen. So you have to learn to be able to think about this in a way that it's constantly evolving, because you are going to constantly evolve. You guys damn well better be constantly evolving. Seriously, do not stop evolving after you get... I'm so depressed that I'm surrounded by 30-year-olds that stop evolving. It's insane that they just, I've got the wife, I've got the mortgage, I've got the kids, I've got the comfy 6-figure job. And so all I have to do for the rest of my life is just consume and be comfortable. Do not do that to yourselves. Keep evolving, keep growing, keep getting better, keep progressing. And as you do that, that means that the cultures that we're going to be in are going to continue to do that. And that means your position within those cultures, your sense of who you are is going to be, which is why you need to learn how to do this in a way that you can continue to grow and evolve and adapt your style as you continue to grow and adapt and evolve who you are as a man and what your position is within the rest of the world. So for you guys that are older, keep doing that, keep focusing, keep progressing, keep making that progress. For you guys who are younger, take risks, take chances, be smart about it, still factor in those other variables, but start experimenting with stuff, take risks. You're going to have losses. Good. You will learn from those losses, and you're going to have wins, which is even better. Double down on those wins and keep learning from those. And as you guys do this, not only are you going to feel so much better as far as the signals that you send to other people, but what's more important is that when you see yourselves in the mirror, when you see, for you old guys, you see your family photos hanging on the wall, and it's you with your kids and your grandkids, you're not going to see a guy who gave up. You're not going to see a guy who just quit and got comfortable. You're going to see a guy that has something worth passing down to his grandkids and is aspirational in a way that his kids go, grandpa's still freaking awesome. And I want to be with grandpa, and I want to continue to grow up and be like grandpa. You young guys can see your pictures on social media, and you don't see this one-dimensional version of yourself that maybe I'm a this or maybe I'm a that, and that's all I am. But when you see a style that reflects you in so many ways, what your attitudes are, what your beliefs are, what your hobbies are, what your interests are, what your morals are, and you have a fully fleshed out multidimensional style, you will identify as a fully fleshed out multidimensional man, as opposed to just being a one-dimensional caricature that's a sideshow in somebody else's story. So take those things, apply them in the right way, and this is how you guys start to dress according to your age. Okay, if you want help on how to do this specifically for you, and like I said, I'm going to open this up for Q&A, but if you know that you want a little bit more help on how to do this, you guys may be a good fit for either my one-on-one or my group coaching. So if you want to talk to me and not like some sales guy, but me, we can do 20 minutes on a Zoom call. You can schedule an appointment here on a link. If I can't help you, or if I don't think you need my help, I'm going to point you towards somebody else, but I would love to see if I can help you guys out. So schedule a call with me on there. But for now, we've got 25 minutes, 30 minutes if we need it. So let's do this. If you've got questions, I want you guys to type them up in the chat, and then we're just going to go in order. And then what I'm basically going to do is, whoever it is that I'm tackling your question, I'm going to have you unmute if I need more context, and we'll be able to talk through this in a couple ways so I can help you out. So thank you guys for coming on. I hope that's helpful. I'm excited to start diving into questions. So start typing them up in the chat, and then we're going to go from there. Okay. Jaron, where did yours go? I just saw it. You changed it. Okay. So we're going to go with Michael. Oh, Michael, what do you recommend for people who have 30 pounds to lose? Okay. This one, I don't think I need more context on. Okay. Start changing your style now. This is where learning how to do this the right way is not something that you can just go out and buy new clothes tomorrow. Like, really learning what this takes can take a few weeks. It can take a little bit of time. So start thinking proactively about this now. If you got more than 30 pounds to lose, what I would recommend is that every like 15 to 20 pound increment that you get, you need to buy more clothes. One, because it reinforces all the progress that you've made. One of the things that's really frustrating, and you guys who have lost weight have experienced this, is when you look in the mirror and it doesn't actually look like you've made any changes, or you only look like you've made any changes when you see yourself once you've gotten out of the shower or before you call it a night. But when it comes to what you're wearing every day, you don't look any different. And so one, you need the reinforcement, the mental reinforcement of, I bought new stuff. I actually look like a different man. I'm totally accomplishing this. I'm on my way, which is good. Two, this is another opportunity to experiment a little bit. I would recommend buying cheap clothes. Go to places like Old Navy or Gap or Zara or H&M or Amazon Marketplace or Target or other places where you can buy cheap stuff. Give yourself permission to experiment with things that may be outside of your comfort zone. And then also recognize that that means when you do hit whatever your target physique is, that it will be time to buy the same thing again. And this can be really hard. It's like, oh, I got a great white t-shirt. Why do I need to buy another white t-shirt when I want to buy this other cool thing? But when you buy a higher quality version, made with better construction, made with better cloth, it is going to look better on you, and it is going to last longer. It's going to break in instead of break down. And so when you get to whatever your target weight is, whatever you have found in that experimentation phase that works, buy that same stuff again, but buy a higher quality version of it, and then start to expand from there. And so don't wait until you've lost the weight entirely to start changing. Start making those changes now so you can reinforce yourself, and then capitalize on the fact that this gives you the opportunity to experiment, because you're going to be throwing out a bunch of clothes in the interim anyway. Okay. Let's see. Is minimalism an archetype, a style, or just an indication that you're not trying hard enough? Depends on how you do it. Okay. So in my 6-step funnel, which is body, archetype, tribe, taste, location, and effort. And if you guys want, I will post up a link to another training I did on that before. Effort is the bottom one, and effort is where minimalism comes into play. I would say that I'm like a half minimalist. I'm in the same jeans or the same shorts and the same Henleys 90% of the time, but then I own more shoes than my wife does, and I own more jackets than my wife does. So I kind of maximize on those things. But there's not a right or a wrong answer when it comes to minimalism versus maximalism. What it ultimately comes down to is, what is an energy boost for you? Is it more of an energy boost to be able to roll out of bed, get dressed in the dark, and know that anything you have will pair well with anything else? But for the most part, that means it's probably just going to be 90% of the way there and never 100% of the way there. Or is it more of an energy boost to really spend the time thinking about, this is what I want to wear today because this is explicitly how I want to be able to communicate things. And I know I've nailed it precisely because I'm wearing this exact combo. And if that's more of an energy boost, then minimalism isn't the right thing for you. A more maximalist approach is. And so there's not a right or a wrong answer to that. There's a subjective, how does it benefit you in your own life? And that's what's going to determine the right or the wrong answer for you. Okay, what about colors and skin tone, etc.? You can get into this. I teach some of this in the coaching and in the courses, but I'll give you guys the easiest way to do this. There are 5 culturally neutral colors that look good on everybody, and you can have a fantastic wardrobe without ever expanding beyond those colors. It's black, white, blue, brown, and gray. Okay. One of the things that I found that most beginners do when it comes to trying to improve their style is they will up the formality. This is again where that gentle dork phenomenon comes from, is they will always try and dress more formal. They will embrace a ton more pattern, or they will embrace a ton more color, or all of it. Whereas most of the experts, the guys who've been dressing well for a really long time, don't do a ton of pattern. They have a full range of formality that's situationally appropriate, and they keep to relatively simple colors. And so instead what they play with is fit or texture or quality or mixing high and low, like this is formal, but this is casual, or all these other kind of variables. And so, yes, it's worth it if you care to get into skin tones and you have a warm or a cool complexion. And there's a book, like an old 80s book that you can buy on Amazon called Color for Men, if you want to like nerd out and go down that pedantic hole. But for the most part, you stick with those 5 culturally neutral colors and you're going to be good to go. All right. Is there wiggle room on style, i.e. like wearing band or pop culture tees with shorts or jeans? Okay, Jeremy, I'm going to have you unmute on this because I actually want a little bit more context on this.
G'day, Tanner. How are you?
Great, dude. How are you?
I'm really well, mate. Really well. Yeah. So casual settings, whether it's going out to a cafe for a coffee or something like that, wearing some nice shorts or some nice jeans with a Rage Against the Machine tee or an A-Team t-shirt or something like that. Is that, am I trying to be too young? What really resonated earlier was, am I trying to hold on to the 80s and 90s too much?
How old are you?
43.
Yep, can't do it. Sorry, dude. Young guys can do it, even with bands that are like now on classic rock that we grew up with. Isn't it weird to hear like Rage as an oldies band?
Yeah, it just ages me every single day I hear that.
Seriously. But young guys can do it, especially if they're more part of the like urban, whether it's a skate culture or a streetwear culture or something else, that they're really leaning into stuff like that. If you're like totally jacked and you have it as a cutoff when you're in the gym, or you're wearing it, as like a training shirt, if you're doing a combat sport and something that way, then you can get away with it. But trying to nice it up by wearing it with good jeans or good sneakers, and you're going to brunch or you're doing something else that us boring middle-aged guys do, that's that aesthetic inertia and you're holding on to the past. So just go with a plain t-shirt from there.
Thanks, man. Anybody want to buy a Rage Against the Machine t-shirt?
Donate it up, right? I kept a lot of mine. I have my old like ska and punk and like really like lame late 90s, early 2000s. I keep a bunch of those in my drawer because there's still a nostalgic effect to them. Yeah, I can't quite make myself throw them away, but I'm never going to wear them again either. So that may be a good solution for you too. Yep.
Thanks,
okay.
Man.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Eric, jewelry such as chains and pendants, acceptable or not necessary? Acceptable, but there are some rules to this. Unlike women, we don't just get to wear stuff because it's pretty or because it looks good. There has to be some sort of symbolism that is infused into it. Okay. This is why wedding rings are still appropriate for men. So if you want to do any sort of accessory, there has to be a story to it. It can't be that I was like, buying shoes at Aldo and it happened to be in the checkout line at the impulse buy. And I picked that up for $8 and now I've got this cool necklace. That doesn't work for us. Okay. So, if it's got some sort of meaning to it, as like I've got a big signet ring that has a bunch of religious symbolism to it for me. And this is kind of like, I look at this and it reminds me of covenants that I've made and commitments that I've made and that kind of stuff. So there's symbolism to it there. I've got a necklace that has a pendant on it that is a coin that was from the East India Trading Company that they found off of a sunken ship in Eastern Oregon. But my wife bought it for me on our very first trip together. And so it's got kind of that connotation to it. And so if it's a gift from somebody else, if there's some sort of symbolism that's infused to it, I'm planning on getting myself a really nice watch in March of next year, because that's going to be my 5-year anniversary of being self-employed. And so it can be kind of a celebration of stuff like that. And you guys, you can kind of, it's pretty easy to make up symbolism to something, but infuse some sort of symbolism into whatever it is that you want to wear. And then you can totally get away with wearing it. One, because when people ask, then you have a story to tell. But then two, it feels a whole lot less vain or shallow or superficial, but it feels like you're actually using your clothing as a way to trigger your own brain to think or to feel certain things. So by all means, go for it. Just have some symbolism injected into it. Okay, for the younger guys, how do you stay on top of the curve without getting fatigued or sucked in over your head? Carrying too much. Okay, Jaron, let's have you unmute, dude. I want to hear your perspective on this.
All right, cool. I just feel like whenever I'm like trying to stay on top of the trend for like fashion in my 20s, I'm dressing like a high school junior or senior. Like, I don't know how else to put it, but like it's also exhausting to like try and stay on top of all the details and trends that are coming from like omnidirections. Like you said, we're no longer bound by geographic community anymore. So everybody in your area is dressing in a million different ways. So how do you filter that without losing your mind?
Okay, so the first thing I would do is move out of the innovator phase into the early adopter phase. So you don't have to be on top of every single trend. This again comes down to that 6th element of effort. For some guys, it is a huge energy boost to constantly be thinking about trends and how they get in front of them, or even if they don't love it, there's a ton of payoff for being out in front of it. It sounds like for you, that's more of an energy drain. And so what we need to do is we need to back off of that to some extent, to where, yes, we're still in the river. We're not just in some dead eddy, but we're still moving to some extent, but maybe we're out of the whitewater rapids and we're moving into the current where it's a little bit more stable and a little bit more steady. But this is about managing what the costs are versus what the benefits are. And so it sounds like for you, the costs are outweighing the benefits. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah. So back off of it a little bit, stick with things that, yeah, maybe they weren't totally like super on trend a year ago, but that also means that they're not going to be super out of trend in another year, but back out into kind of a more macro perspective of this is more general. This is a little bit more moving in those slower currents. Does that help?
Totally.
Okay. Awesome. All right, Robert, I'm 55, went somewhere in chinos, a fitted white t-shirt and plain white leather tennis shoes. Someone said, "Oh, you're dressing young." Is that a signal I'm not dressing my age? It depends on the person. And it depends on the cut. Robert, let me have you unmute. I want to hear about like how slim it all was and all of that. Give me a little bit more context on it.
Yeah, so it was actually at a family gathering at the park.
Okay.
It was a cotton t-shirt, but she specifically commented on the shoes.
Okay.
The shoes. But then, so since I discovered your stuff, I've started following some others as well. And there's some that say the plain simple thing, the t-shirts without logos, the fitted pants, whatever, keep it simple. And then there's another one that says, once you're past 45, t-shirts you really shouldn't do that except for exercise. And so I'm just trying to sort through all of this.
Yeah. So this is where a lot of those different tribe indicators come in. I'm very hesitant to say that when it comes to like, as soon as you hit 55, t-shirts are no longer relevant unless you're in the gym, because if you're in places like Southern California, which is a super casual culture, then you're insane for wearing a button-up shirt all the time when everybody else around you is in graphic t-shirts, and you're doing it better by doing it in plain and simple t-shirts. And so a lot of it is going to have to do with what your different tribes are and what's kind of going on from an aesthetic and a style perspective around you, and also how that factors in from a location perspective too. Let me ask you, when she said it, did she say it in a way that was a little bit disdainful? Did she say it in a way that she was kind of enjoying it and attracted to it? How did it come across from that perspective?
Kind of like she was a bit surprised.
Okay. Has she earned the right for her opinion to matter to you?
Yeah, it's my sister.
Oh, it's your sister. Yeah, sisters don't count. They tease you. Right. Yeah. So I would kind of take all of those different cues in and factor it in that way. And one of the things that you guys who are older than 50 will get a lot, because most of the time it is dads in crappy white New Balance sneakers and old Carpenter jeans that still hang past their knees and massive Nike polo shirts, is you will look younger, but what you don't want to do is look like you think that you're still 18. You just want to look healthy and vibrant and like you've still got things going on in your life, as opposed to I peaked, I gave up, and I'm done. So I wouldn't take that as necessarily a compliment or as an undercutted insult. I would just take it as an observation that you don't look like every other dad your age.
Okay.
That kind of help?
Nice positive spin on there. Yeah, sure.
But pay more attention. Pay more attention to those other cues around you, and then you can start to calibrate it from there. Okay.
Well, if I can take another minute, I mean,
Sure.
I live in Georgia, around Atlanta,
Mm-hmm.
to be in St. George, Utah, but in Georgia, all the guys my age even are wearing shorts.
Okay.
Just don't like wearing shorts in unless it's an exercise thing. you
Yeah.
know? And the same thing, I just don't find polos. I have a really hard time finding polos that I feel comfortable in. So
Gotcha.
look is a little bit, it's either kind of the button down shirt with the rolled up sleeves,
Mm-hmm.
or a t-shirt that I finally found some that are fitted that aren't just super baggy or.
Right. What kind of shape are you in? I mean, you've got a good head of hair, you've got a good, strong facial features, and so that works to your advantage. What kind of shape are you in?
I'm getting there. I mean, a little overweight. I'm 200, but
And
5'11",
what's the target weight for you?
185.
Oh, okay. So you're way better than most guys your age, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Just keep doing what you're doing. Absolutely. Yeah. You have again, those other kind of general status signals and that other kind of relevancy that you haven't given up. You don't look like you've given up. And so continue to embrace that this works with that and it's congruent with that. And that other people are going to feel a little bit uncomfortable about it. One of the things that you and a lot of other, I mean, really, this is not relative to any particular age, because guys in their 30s, guys in their teens get this, is just be ready for some pushback or some heat from guys who are pissed off that you're raising the standard on them, or even women that are pissed off that you're raising the standard because then their husbands don't dress that way or something else, because it's you're rejecting our decline toward mediocrity, and it kind of can piss people off. So be ready for that. Yeah. But based on everything that I'm hearing from your context, it sounds like you're doing exactly what you're supposed to do.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So own it. Yep. Okay. I know you touched on this before, but length versus size, t-shirts are hard to find. I'm 6 feet, 32-inch waist and 48 inch. Okay. Yeah. This is what sucks, is that you go buy a medium t-shirt from J. Crew, and then you buy a medium t-shirt from Buck Mason, you buy a medium t-shirt from Cuts, and then there's no consistency to them whatsoever, because sizing is relative. And then not only that, but the pattern is relative. Maybe this brand has their sleeves that are a little bit shorter and the circumference is a little bit tighter. Maybe these guys like a little bit more drape in the seat and the waist. Maybe these guys like the yoke to be a little bit slimmer. And so a lot of this is initially putting in the effort to experiment and find a brand that works for you. And then when you find the brand that works, be incredibly loyal to them and buy stuff from them for as long as you can get away with it, because it's a ton of upfront efforts. And then after that, it's super easy to be able to maintain, and it's worth it. And so Brett, it just sounds like you're kind of in that experiment phase, but start capitalizing. This is one of the benefits of being in a digital commerce and being in a more global world, is you're not just limited to, Dillard's or J. Crew or Old Navy or the Gap or any of these other places that 10, 15 years ago we would have been kind of stuck with. You can look at places like Cuts or Son of a Tailor or Buck Mason or Kino Clothing, or so many other brands out there that are specifically doing stuff based on different physiques and different body types. And so start to experiment and expand on things from there. Okay, Walter, I recently changed jobs and the dress code is completely different and competitive as far as men's fashion goes. Do you have some advice on how fast I should transition without looking like a tryhard? I like this question, Walter. Let's have you unmute so that we can talk about this.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
You probably know what this place is. I used to work at a warehouse with my dad, and so
Okay.
functional clothing only.
Uh-huh.
And now I'm working in the alterations department at UWM Men's Shop. Used to be Utah Woolen Mills.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome.
And it is super I'm thankfully I'm not on like the sales floor, so I don't have to be dressed up like at the Ritz, but at the same time, like I want to be like have a good presence and not look like this the dumpy guy downstairs. So I'm wondering like how much financial investment I should be putting in. What I did, I bought a color matching, like a book that has like um color inspiration. So like
Mhm.
different ways to try to like make it more use out of the clothes I do have. But I
Okay.
just not sure how much money I should be putting into my clothing to transition properly and just kind of remake my presence, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
That makes sense. So the amount of money to spend is another effort question, because some guys love the idea, and Utah Woolen Mills customers are this way, where it's like, sick, I'm not buying a jacket unless it's at least $4,500 because that's exactly the flex that I want it to be. And that's a lot of what your customers are. And that's why they pay what they do at your shop. Other guys are just like, oh man, if I spend more than $1,000 on an entire wardrobe, I am stressing out. And so again, there's not a right or a wrong answer to that. Is it an energy boost to spend money on clothes, or is it an energy drain? And how does that translate into all of these other factors? So what I would recommend, based on what I'm hearing from you, first of all, tell me, how much physical work do you have to do?
I'm just I'm on my feet all day. No really big crazy physical things. But I do get exposed to lots of hot steam.
Okay.
a lot of the time.
Okay. So what I would do is I would again keep it really simple with colors. I would stick with those 5 neutrals. I would do things that are relatively in the middle territory as far as formality is concerned. So I would do a good pair of jeans, do a good pair of chinos, and then I would do button-up shirts in that environment, but that have more texture to them so that they wear a little bit more casually. So Oxford cloth button downs, maybe an OCBD that has a candy stripe to it, get them in a few different colors, and then do braided belts or suede belts. Maybe do a pair of like chukkas or some good dress sneakers. And then maybe if you wanted to get a little bit more dressed up, I would do some like suede cap toe Balmorals or something else. And so that's a relatively simple, pretty versatile wardrobe that is going to look like the more dressed down workwear version of what your environment is, but it's not totally obtuse to that, nor is it trying to dress up in, double-breasted sport coats worn over t-shirts like a lot of the guys will do in those type of environments too. So it's not too try hard, but it's recognizing the social environment that you're in and what the tribe expectations are. Yeah.
Thanks.
Does that help?
Yes, it does.
Awesome. Okay. Great question. All right, Matthew, right? Yes. Okay. 40 years old, Philadelphia, wear a suit to work every day. New boss moving to a business casual attire. So fun, where we go from really easily understanding what we're supposed to wear to this like nebulousness of like, what the crap do you want from me? This seems more difficult than suits because suits are basically just uniforms. Hey, it's like we can read each other's minds. Any basic rules to follow regarding mixing and matching chinos with sport coats and shirts, etc.? Yes. Texture is going to be your friend here, especially when it comes to jackets and shirts and all of that. A suit jacket cannot be worn with anything but its suit pants. And so if it's really finely woven, and if there's a lot of sheen to it, it's not going to work. So you want texture, you want more of a flat color. And a lot of times in this case, pattern or even a little bit of color variation can help. Same thing when you're wearing shirts, you want more texture in it that way because it's intended to be worn. And then by doing that, then you can get away with wearing it with jeans and chinos and other things that are a little bit more in that business casual setting. The other thing that I will tell you is a lot of guys make the mistake when they go to business casual of thinking that they can wear casual clothes and then wear a polo shirt to dress them up. But a polo shirt actually helps dress more formal clothes down. So I would never wear a polo with a pair of jeans. I would wear a polo underneath a sport coat or wear it with a pair of chinos instead of trying to bring your more casual stuff up. And then the last thing, although I doubt this is the situation for you, but if you ever get into that really nebulous territory where it's like, do I do a tie or do I do a jacket? Always do the jacket without the tie as opposed to the tie without the jacket. The tie without the jacket is going to make you look like you're part of the IT department or you're some sort of like a waiter or something else. Whereas the jacket without the tie has much more of that kind of executive. I'm comfortable in kind of managing where things are and I'm comfortable in my own skin kind of feel. So does that help, Matthew? Are you still on with me? Yes. Awesome. Okay. I see you. That's helpful. Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. All right. JT, hold on real quick, guys. I'm just going to pop this link in here as a reminder. If you want more help with this, schedule a call with me. I may be able to answer some quick questions right then and there. You may be a good fit for my coaching. I may be able to point you towards somebody else. But if you want more help with this stuff, this is where I can dive even deeper with you. So schedule a call with me. Okay, let's get back up to JT and keep going. Small business owner in the trades, how to balance function with not looking like I'm another grease monkey. Dude, 40% of my clients are guys like you. It is so difficult to be able to manage the like blue collar business owner because you have to dress in a way that signals status and authority and frankly, that you get it with contractors or investors or all the other people that most of the time are wearing suits or they're more in the white collar world. But at the same time, you don't want to look to, this probably isn't a real word anymore, but like hoity toity. You don't want to look like I'm in my ivory tower and I can't get down in the dirt with everybody else. And so most of the time, what this comes down to, and again, we'd have to talk specifics. I'd have to know more about your situation, give you real, like, this is what we should be wearing. But again, like, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse at this point because it's the last three answers, but go with texture. Go with texture where you can do jeans with some good chukka boots or jeans with some good things like Wolverines or Red Wing Iron Rangers, and then a utility shirt. And that will work really well in that kind of worker. And I don't look like I'm too dressed up, but then you tuck that shirt in and you throw on a sport coat over it, or you throw on a good vest over it, or you throw on something else that's a little bit more formal over it. And then you don't have to do a full wardrobe change. You just make a pretty simple change when you go in to meet with somebody else that's in more of a white collar environment. So that's kind of the general rule of thumb. But again, to get really specific with you, I'd have to work with you on it. And it's really fun with guys like you to be able to figure all this out. So, okay, Rogerio. I sometimes feel like good style comes from cooler places. Do you have any tips on style in hot, humid climates? I feel all I can use without getting too sweaty is jeans and a t-shirt. Linen and linen, wool, silk, cotton blends. Go with things that are light and airy. That can be really helpful. A lot of this is going to depend on your archetype, because refined guys have a whole different like spectrum of clothes that they can play with. In fact, Rogerio, are you still on? Because if you are, let's pull you up. Okay, give me a little bit more context on this, dude.
All right, so I'm living in Mexico City, which I feel like sometimes it's too hot. I work in a pretty relaxed environment. I work in innovation and we have a very relaxed dress code. Mm-hmm. But really, sometimes I just try to put a jacket on or something like that, and then I start sweating a lot and it's too much. So yeah. I feel like I have to keep it really simple.
Yeah, especially because where you are is not only hot, but super humid too, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So you get that double fun that kind of adds into it. So unless you're in incredibly formal situations where it's kind of required to wear a jacket or dress up in a way that's a little bit more formal, I would shy away from it. So when we're a little bit more refined, that means that you can do casual trousers that are going to be linen or like hopsack weaves on wool or wool cotton blends or tropical weight wools. But again, if they have a lot of texture, and then you can do that even with t-shirts, you can do that with short sleeve button-ups as long as they fit well. You can do it with linen button-up shirts. You can do those same shirts and do them with shorts if we're going even more casual. So there's room to be able to play with it. But I need to know a little bit more as far as going through some of these specific steps with you to really get you diving in on that. But start experimenting with different cloths and different materials, and that'll start you moving in the right direction. Good. Awesome. Okay. Good question. Okay. Neil, Tanner just told us to buy great whites. Yeah. Right. There you go. You're welcome. I've given you permission. Okay. Is it acceptable to archetype switch? I dress super refined for work and very rugged at home. Both feel equally me, but I'm at risk of sending mixed messages to people who may see me in both contexts. I would recommend trying to bring a little bit more of the refined at home and a little bit more of the rugged at work, but not a ton. This is why it's not just based on archetypes. This is why we also factor in tribe and location. Just like it's not inconsistent and you're not being a different person when you wear certain clothes to the gym and you wear other clothes to a funeral. There are these contextual cues that make things change, but just from your own personal perspective, as far as seeing yourself as fully multidimensional, and also so that it looks like there's some consistency, I would definitely recommend bringing a little bit more of each into those other environments in ways that are both tribally and locationally appropriate to do so. So experiment with that, and then you'll start to feel a little bit more consistency in what you're doing. Bigger picture question. Archetype switches do happen as you get older and your life changes, because as you continue to grow and evolve, you may find yourself embracing things that are more rugged, or most guys that are really rakish when they're young tend to soften on that as they get older. And so don't feel like that because you know what your archetype ratio is at a given point in time, that you're stuck with that for the rest of your life. Again, continue to evaluate yourself and assess as you continue to flow and evolve, because this is going to happen for you too. Okay, I've seen so many girls wearing Nirvana shirts. They weren't, yeah, exactly, right, Michael? That's a perfect example. And these girls, they don't even recognize it. It's not even that they think that it's oldies. It's just that this is what they saw on Pinterest or on Instagram, and then they're doing it anyway. Okay, which watches am I consider? Yes, jump in.
Can I quickly comment on that?
Yeah, please do, dude.
I have this like slight fantasy or dream of creating a shirt that says Nirvana and then putting a picture of the Hanson kids on it.
Oh, just a troll?
And see if anyone gets it.
Please do that. That is such a good troll.
I'll send you my spring tea link
in
a minute.
Do it. I love it. Yes. Okay, which watches am I considering? So what I'm wearing right now is a Baltic Aquascape. I just got this like a week ago and I love it. It's more of like a micro brand. And really the reason is because it was like $800 instead of $8,000. And it's got a cool like dive watch feel to it. I like that it's bronze because I tend to wear warmer metals. Sorry guys, I'm getting over being sick, so I'm super congested. I think what I want to get, because this is more my casual dive watch, is I think I want to do something like a Rolex Datejust, or maybe a Perpetual Oyster, maybe a Tudor version of something like that. But I want to find an old vintage version, like from '84, the year that I was born, and kind of play with it that way. I don't think I want to do a watch that's brand new. I want to do something that's a little bit more kind of vintage and have it, but I still got a few months to figure that out, and we'll see where things are when we get there anyway. So we'll see. I'll let you know when I decide. Yes, Rudo Heat, we will. I've recorded this, so I'm going to post this up and I'll send you guys links to it. Isn't it better for young guys to wear timeless style and just accessorize a bit more rakishly and wear one stand-up piece to not look like a fashion victim? Definitely. You don't want to just like fashion vomit all over yourself. When I say take some risks, that doesn't mean just go absolutely insane. This is again why you have to factor in some of these other variables like your archetype ratio, like that. And for the most part, this is applicable across the board. If you're wearing a really strong statement piece, then everything else that you're wearing should be really subtle and should anchor that as opposed to competing with it. That's one of the big like primal differences between good style and being a cartoon character. And that is that's applicable irrespective of your age. And so don't think what I mean when I say that you should experiment and take risks. It just means get completely ridiculous about all of this. So I'm glad I saw the thumbs up on that. Thanks for that, dude. Okay. CEOs were, yeah, a lot of CEOs tend to do that, where they like that they can flex by wearing crappy clothes. And personally, I hate that culture, but we're kind of stuck within that too. So you got to embrace that. Okay. What about fast fashion brands like ASOS and Shine? What do you mean by that, Michael? Did Michael bounce? Okay, no worries. All right, I switched from an engineering to jazz drums major. So from refined to rakish, that was difficult, but I've also recently been into a lot of classic literature and very academic stuff. So I'm trying to mix the rakish with those classic pieces, plus the musicians at the top of the hierarchy are just badly dressed baby boomers with horrible fitting suits. Ooh, there's a lot of contextual cues in here that I personally don't understand, Joshua, because I'm not in those tribes. And so what I would do is I would start to look to guys that are in those various tribes that are doing what you want to do. They're embodying the ideals or the attitudes or the ethos that you want. And then start to not just outright copy, but emulate and mix off of and play with whatever their aesthetics are that they're doing. I would also maybe start to pull from other kind of similarly aligned tribes. And so to me, when I see a lot of this, I see a lot of like the menswear tribe that you can bring in some of the more kind of aggressive nerding out on styleform.net, these kind of menswear ideas, and put them into the music tribe and make these things mix. Because from a general attitude about the past and that stuff, there's a lot of overlap, just like we would see back when I was in high school, you would see a lot of crossover between extreme sports like skating and BMX and like punk rock music, where they were largely separate tribes, but because they weren't conflicting hobbies, there was a lot of overlap between them. And so that's what the other thing that I would look to is, what are the things beyond the music that are kind of associated with those cultures, or where you can do some overlap. And then the last thing is, depending on how good you are, depending on how popular your band is, the higher your status rises within that world, the more you can flex and set the tone on that as well. And so, and musicians have it very different, because even then, when you're like a crappy house band that's just barely getting and getting up and running at all, you still have a lot more room to flex, especially if it's part of like the whole band and part of the whole brand and everything else there as well. So I could give you more, but again, it's going to depend on a lot of, like, I'd have to go through that pretty deep with you. Okay. I've heard the puffy polo and similar combos referred to as scrum bro. Yes, Ben, I've never heard of that, but that very much like reminds me of like Wall Street Traders, right? And it's that whole either of like Zad and Chad and Brad and Zad and that whole like comic culture and everything. Yeah, absolutely. Scrum. I'm stealing that. That's awesome. Okay. Rules for suiting for young guys that they occasionally use them for parties. Depends on the party, but when you're younger, this is where I would embrace whatever the trends are a little bit more. And I would also try and make your suit look a little bit more casual if you can get away with that. This is where that picture of Jose, where he was wearing it and he was sockless and he had on the white sneakers and he was doing a turtleneck as opposed to a button-up shirt with a tie on, by making it work a little bit more casual. But it has to be the right sneakers, and it has to be the right fit, it has to be the right trends, and all of those things have to be done in the right way. But essentially embracing more trends, trying to make it a little bit more casual can be a good place to get started and can be some good help from there. Awesome. Okay, you guys, thank you so much for spending your evening with me. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that it gave you some good kind of big picture principles to work from, and then also a bunch of ways to start to apply this as well. Like I said, if you want more specific help on this, one more time, there's the link so that you could schedule to jump on with jump on a call with me. I'm going to be doing another one of these next month. We're going to do something totally different, but thank you again for spending the time. If you're not on the mailing list, get on the mailing list by going and taking the archetype quiz, because I'm going to be mailing out the link for this recording so that you guys can go back and watch this again a second time. So yes, I will get you the link for this, and we'll call it an evening from there. So thanks for hanging out with me, guys, and have a great night. Bye, guys.